Okay, you can go.
Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is June 11th, 2025. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions or comments via email to Helga at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the YouTube chat page. Helga, the pace of events continues to be more than dizzying. We've had several breaking developments just in the last hours. So I think what we should do is start with you. I'll just turn it right over to you to get started.
Yes, hello to all of you. I had to, on the short notice, change what I wanted to communicate with you, to you, because I just received a rather breathtaking short video clip from Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence. So I would like, I want like our assistant to show this. Please watch this and then we talk about it.
A single nuclear bomb dropped in 1945, 80 years ago. It's hard for me to find the words to express what I saw, the stories that I heard, the haunting sadness that still remains. This is an experience that will stay with me forever. This attack obliterated the city, killed over 300,000 people, many dying instantly while others died from severe burns, injuries, radiation sickness, and cancer that set in the following months and years. Nagasaki suffered the same fate. Homes, schools, families, all gone in a flash. The survivors, the hibakusha, they carried the pain of extreme burns, radiation sickness, and loss for decades. Survivors of this attack were asked to put in paintings and drawings their own memories and how they felt and what they saw, and those paintings and the suffering that they conveyed, the pain and the sense of loss were almost more powerful than the photos themselves. Yet this one bomb that caused so much destruction on Hiroshima was tiny compared to today's nuclear bombs. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of just 15 kilotons of TNT, whereas today's nuclear warheads range in size from 100 kilotons to over 1 megaton. A single nuclear weapon today could kill millions in just minutes. Just one of these nuclear bombs would vaporize everything at its core: people, buildings, life itself. The shockwave would crush structures miles away, killing and maiming countless people. And then comes the fallout. Radioactive poison spreading through the air, water, and soil, condemning survivors to agonizing deaths or lifelong suffering. A nuclear winter could follow, with smoke and ash completely blocking the sun, plunging the world into darkness and cold, killing crops and starving billions. Acid rain would scar the earth, wiping out entire ecosystems. This isn't some made-up science fiction story. This is the reality of what's at stake, what we are facing now. Because as we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. Perhaps it's because they are confident that they will have access to nuclear shelters for themselves and for their families that regular people won't have access to. So it's up to us, the people, to speak up and demand an end to this madness. We must reject this path to nuclear war and work toward a world where no one has to live in fear of a nuclear holocaust. I recently visited Hiroshima in Japan.
So, Helga, this is coming in the context of a growing tension, but also tremendous changes. So why don't you start from there?
Well, I think the fact that the Tulsi Gabbard, in her position as the National Director of Intelligence, put out such a video. I think while we don't know at this point yet the background or circumstances other than that she apparently did travel to Hiroshima, I think probably reflects something we don't know yet. Maybe a discussion in high circles. It is quite possible that, very probable that this video would not have been released without the knowledge of President Trump. And, given the fact that, at the end of the Biden administration, according to credible leaks, the Pentagon was convinced that the possibility that it would come to an exchange of nuclear weapons if long-range missiles were given to the Ukrainians for delivery deep into the territory of Russia, that there was a 50% chance estimate that this would lead to nuclear war, and that was accepted. There was, almost no discussion about that in the mainstream media, but they are not known to be very truth-seeking these days anyway. But, it is quite possible that there is a relationship to the fact that, the Ukrainians launched this drone attack on the strategic bombers in Russia, which are part of the nuclear triad of Russia. Now, there is still a lot of, uncertainty of what were the circumstances of this Ukrainian drone attack. There are some people, including the Russians themselves, who say that this would have been absolutely not possible without assistance from MI6, possibly knowledge and cooperation of the CIA. Lavrov himself basically stated that the Russians are 100% sure that this was conducted and aided by British intelligence, and the role of the British is being emphasized in the entire escalation. Now, other people are saying, no, this was the Ukrainians all by themselves. They have the drone warfare perfected. There is an article in the Financial Times which claims this was entirely only the Ukrainians. They have the most advanced warfighting capability concerning drone warfare right now. So I'm not making a final judgment on this debate, but I think if the Director of National Intelligence releases such a video in this context, I think we should take it extremely serious. And since we have been warning about, what could happen, how easily, a war can escalate, and, the almost incidents and accidents which have taken place in the past, the heightened tension, we are sitting on a powder keg. And I can only say that I personally extremely welcome the fact that Tulsi Gabbard put out this statement, because most people are worse than sleepwalking. People are absolutely indifferent to the escalation of the danger, and there are warmongers in the West. There is no question about it. So I fully agree with her conclusion that it does require the people to send an unmistakable message to the so-called leaders, which are after all only employees by the people who are the sovereign, and that this warning should be spread as widely as possible. So, take this video, repost it as widely as you can, and get a discussion going about that danger. That would be my initial response.
Well, I think this is a reflection of the courageous and persistent work that you've been doing, the Schiller Institute's been doing, to put forward your late husband's understanding of the specific role of the British oligarchy and empire. This has really broken out in the last days in the discussions. You mentioned Sergei Lavrov, a whole number of Russian commentators, but also the Kit Klarenberg column in the on the Project Alchemy, the role of the British. This really gets at the core of the problem, that who's trying to stop the normalization of relations with Russia. What can you say about what you see around Trump? Because it's still a confusing picture.
Well, there are indeed very confusing and even contradictory signals. Just today, President Trump announced that he apparently concluded a deal with China, that everything is now fine again, that China will export rare earths to the United States, that vice versa, Chinese students can again study at American universities. So that's a positive sign. Then there are reports that President Trump apparently also was on the phone with Netanyahu and basically told him that he is not going to have a nuclear or any strike against Iran, and that the whole issue has to be settled peacefully. Then on the other side, you have this unbelievable situation in Los Angeles, where you have, the policy by the Trump administration to expel so-called illegal aliens, immigrants. This is causing heartbreaking scenes, where families are being torn apart. So there are demonstrations now spreading in many American cities, and that seems to be a legitimate concern. But then you have provocateurs among them who are committing violent acts and who are getting into struggles with the police force, the National Guard. Trump has deployed the National Guard, which I think is a very problematic step, because it is definitely a escalation against the population. Even the Marines have been sent there. And then Trump made a speech at some American military camp where he used the language which I absolutely abhor. I don't even want to repeat it here, in terms of how he characterized these demonstrators. So, I think President Trump probably, and I still keep being convinced of it, he definitely wants to normalize relations with Russia. And I think, given the dangers which Tulsi Gabbard's video points to, namely the annihilation of all life on the planet, I think that is the most important. And therefore, I think one should somehow, stick to the priority, namely the most important issue, because the deployments of so many forces, the British for sure, the so-called coalition of the willing, and many other factors are trying to derail this effort by Trump to normalize the relationship with Russia, the two, the U.S. and Russia being the two most powerful nuclear forces in the world. And if you start with the top, then that is the most important to concentrate on. Does that mean one should approve of everything else? Absolutely not, because I think President Trump would need, in some respects, some better advisors than he seems to have, because especially on the Middle East, it is very, very problematic. So I can only say this is the hour where ordinary citizens have to become active again. Remember the spirit of the American Revolution, which after all was a revolution against the British Empire. The War of Independence was the first anti-colonial war in the history of mankind. And the more Americans now, shortly before the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, would think back and revive the spirit not only of the American Republic, but of the American Revolution, I think that would be the most important. And since the American Revolution was not just an American local affair, but it was an international project where humanist and Republican forces from Europe and elsewhere, but especially Europe, basically, decided to make the American project the first true republic in the world. Therefore, what happens to America is not just America's business, but if this project fails, if they submit to the special relationship and run the world as a British Empire, or modeled on the British Empire, then that would be the absolute ultimate failure of the American project. So a lot is at stake here, and I think that ordinary people have to start to take responsibility, because the world is in such a state of chaos, and you cannot rely on the institutions which existed in the last 80 years, because they're crumbling. They are clearly in a process of disintegration, and I think we are just seeing the beginning of that. And therefore, the more people become state citizens, the better for mankind to have a hope to get out of this without a catastrophe.
Well, you're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche. This is our weekly dialogue with her. And Helga, I think we're getting a reflection of the awakening of a broader network of people and the questions that I've gotten in the last hour or two. Someone wrote in and said there's a report on a communique from the NATO summit upcoming that seems to be moving away from an anti-Russian, pro-Ukraine posture. Do you have anything on that?
Yes, this is very interesting, because unlike the communique of 2024, which declared Russia to be the enemy and so forth, it still mentions Russia in the context of the Ukraine war, but it no longer, or no, the other way around, it still mentions Russia as a threat to NATO, but it does not anymore point to the role of Russia as the aggressor in the Ukraine war, and it does not talk about Ukraine having access to NATO, which the 24 communique did. I think it is clearly a reflection that there is a deep rift between those Europeans who call themselves the War Alliance or the Coalition of the Willing. It's not all of Europe, and it's for sure not all of the EU and NATO, because a large part of these two institutions do not agree with that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to form a coalition of the willing. But there is clearly a rift, and I think that's a very first positive step in the right direction. So let's see how this NATO summit plays out.
Along those same lines, I mentioned earlier the Kit Klarenberg article where he brought up Project Alchemy as an MI6 operation that's involved in such things as targeting the Kerch Bridge and others. We have a question here from a contact in the United Kingdom who said, if you put Klarenberg's article together with the articles earlier this year in the New York Times and the London Times about the CIA and MI6 role preparing for war with Russia going back to 2014, he writes, how long can the supporters of a long war against Russia hide behind their assertion that Putin's special military operation was unprovoked?
Well, I don't think much longer, because there is now a whole, not an array, but several books are being written by very good, credible historians, which detail, the prehistory. You can either go to the Maidan coup, which was clearly instigated by Victoria Nuland, who bragged that the State Department spent $5 billion on NGOs in Ukraine alone preparing the Maidan coup. You have the, we published a lot at the time when it happened. And, in any case, so you can either start there, that this was an illegitimate coup against a legitimate elected government in Ukraine, and all the things which happened afterwards, the vote in Crimea, where the population decided to want to be part of Russia, developments in the Donbass as a reaction against the prohibition to use the Russian language, and beginning civil war against Donbass. All of these things have been part of the prehistory. You can discuss the Minsk II sabotage by Merkel and Hollande. This is all on the public record. You can look at the various efforts by Putin to get legally binding security guarantees for Russia as late as on the 17th of December 21, at the refusal by the Biden administration and NATO to answer that in any way. And we could make a long, long list. And we have actually, as it happened on a day-to-day basis, published all of that. Or you can even take it back earlier to the broken promises that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward at the time of the end of the Cold War. In any case, it is a well-documented prehistory. And as I said, many very important books are being published about that around the world. So it's very increasingly difficult by those who are trying to keep the rep on that and stick to the NATO narrative about the unprovoked war. I think that story is crumbling. In any case, it has never been believed by the countries of the global south, who have their own independent judgment, and they don't fall as easily for the NATO narrative as some of the duped people in Europe or the United States. So I think that story is going to to evaporate, and maybe in the future people will take a fresh look at that history and come to quite different conclusions than the present mainstream media tries to evoke.
Well, in addition to the books that you say are being written, every week, in fact, every day, the Executive Intelligence Review puts out a daily report that's way ahead of virtually everyone else. And that's something that people can subscribe to and circulate. Now, there are a couple more questions on the emergence of the citizenry as an active part of changing history. From the UK, there's someone who writes in about a headline story that quoted former U.S. intelligence operative Fiona Hill, who was very much involved in the Russiagate story, put out a statement saying Russia is at war with the United Kingdom and the U.S. cannot be relied on. And she writes, the contact writes, when can we expect the population in Europe to take their heads out of their you-know-what and move to bring down their unpopular governments? And then along those lines, there's a question specifically for you. Someone wrote, I heard about your rally in Schrobenhausen on Saturday opposing Merz's intent to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. She writes, can you give us an update on the response and what can people do to protest this policy in Germany?
Well, my answer to the first question would have been to refer to the rally in Schrobenhausen, which we did last Saturday, and this was very, very, I would say, refreshing. And there is a video out, which I think we have posted on the Schiller site, if I'm not mistaken. If we haven't done it, we will do so. It was really very excellent because, Schrobenhausen is together with a city in Sweden. These are the two places where the Taurus is being put together. And, given the fact that the Russian response to a deployment of the Taurus, this has been mooted by several Russian military experts, could very well be that, if the Taurus would ever be deployed, let's say, into Moscow or other places wide into the territory of Russia, that a possible response by Russia would be to send one or more of these Oreshnik missiles, hypersonic missiles, which cannot be stopped. They are undefeatable. So there would be the possibility to take out the factory where the Taurus missile is being produced and put together. That would be a very, very sharp signal. Schrobenhausen is a city, I think 13,000 inhabitants, 40 kilometers away from Munich. So that's why we had a rally. That's the Schiller Institute, another organization called Basis, and also a parliamentarian of the AfD, and I think some other people, citizens, were speaking. And what was really good is that there were about 800 people, most of them from Schrobenhausen itself. And what was really incredibly, the speeches were on a very high level, not just your typical, campaign speeches or rally speeches, but very thoughtful, high-level intellectual discussion. and the population, and you can see that in the video, they were listening attentively, being extremely serious. And then several of them came to the microphone and stated unbelievably beautiful things. For example, there was one woman who said, and we are telling these politicians who are pushing these provocations that they are our employees. We are employing them. They are not our bosses. So this was an expression of a sovereign spirit. I would really like to hear from German citizens more often, because if there would be a majority of citizens, or even a very large number of citizens, who would remind the politicians that they have sworn an oath to defend the common good of the people and prevent damage from being done to them, they would have to fear that if they don't obey their oath, that they will be chased out of office in the nearest possible time. So I think these kinds of manifestation of the will of a sovereign people was very heartwarming. And I can only, hope that the example that Tropenhausen will become a model to be repeated by many, many cities and citizens all over Germany and actually all over Europe.
On this question of people trying to cover their ass, 4 of the Five Eyes countries announced sanctions against the Zionist extremists Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. But the question came in, why not announce instead a cutoff of weapons and financial aid to Israel? We had this report of Trump's call to Netanyahu. The UN issued a report today saying that Israel is committing war crimes, and former prime ministers of Israel are saying the same thing. Do you see this situation finally changing? And with the United Nations having hearings shortly to take up the question of the Oasis plan as the solution, as opposed to just some vague notion of stopping a war?
Well, I think that there is right now, unfortunately, mixed signals coming from the Trump administration, because both Rubio and I think also Hegseth basically, said the United States is no longer supporting a two-state solution. That's tragic. I mean, that must be reversed. Obviously, this has to do a lot with, the workings of Netanyahu's influence inside the United States. That would be a catastrophe, and I can only hope that this is reversed, because obviously if the United States would cut off all weapons and financial aid, the whole horror show would stop shortly. And that's the reality of the matter. Now, the public opinion in the world is clearly shifting, and I think that the tiny little reversals which you have seen, for example, in Germany, where even Merz started to take an attitude, that this all goes too far and so late, but insufficient. But nevertheless, I think this shift is the result of the fact that the reputation of those countries who are still backing what the UN has characterized as genocide is devastating, and I don't think it will be recovered. The fact that Germany, for example, had for a very long period this time, given the German history, I think this is something, which will not be remedied very easy. And I can only say the only redemption would be, that Germany and European countries, together with the United States, would basically put an end to this horror show and instead revert to rebuilding the region, where the Oasis plan would be a centerpiece, and basically peace could be brought to the entire region, not just Israel and Palestine. But right now, I think it's still on the edge, and there are the forces who even think the annexation of the West Bank is a legitimate goal. It's a huge battle. On the other side, you have the Gaza Peace March, where I think thousands of people have started to march from somewhere in Morocco or Algeria, all the way through the Maghreb. I think they are now in Egypt. They will give a press conference trying to make the point that the citizens of the world have to march for the right, to distribute at least humanitarian aid to the people who are locked into the Gaza cemetery or almost cemetery. So this is an issue which I think I think morally this will be one of the issues which will decide over our moral fitness to survive as a human species. Because if you tolerate something so absolutely horrendous, it says everything about yourself and your, moral fiber. So I can only say, let's help us to mobilize for this, putting the Oasis plan on the agenda at the UN conference, which will start in a few days. We have, mobilized a lot of embassies, a lot of ambassadors, a lot of forces in the different countries to come out and demand the implementation of the Oasis plan. So please add your support to our campaign.
I have one more question for you, Helga, which is from a Mexican-based podcaster who said with everything going on in the world, he hasn't been hearing much about the mobilization of the BRICS countries to establish a new development architecture. And he asks if you have any update on that.
Well, there is obviously the BRICS summit coming up in Brazil, I think in July. There are already a lot of preparatory meetings going on. I think that, I'm absolutely confident that, there will be more countries joining. There is a tremendous push by the Africans, for example, to have a much larger role. We will have a very important conference of the Schiller Institute in July in Germany, which will feature a lot the absolute necessity of Europe and China and the BRICS to collaborate to finally go for a crash program for the development of Africa, bringing electricity to 600 million people who don't have electricity yet, to address all of the other urgent issues in terms of water, infrastructure, and that will be a major point of discussion. So, you should register for this conference. If you are in Germany, register, to attend it in person. If you are, anywhere else in the world, you should register to participate online. But I think, we have to absolutely put the agenda of the BRICS countries as the alternative. And, all the problems of the world could be easily changed and solved if the Europeans and the Americans would just say, we stop the geopolitical confrontation with the global majority and we shift gears and we cooperate. That would be so easy. And, hopefully what Trump announced in terms of the agreement with China could be a baby step in this direction. So let's see, not waiting, but mobilize to put this idea of a new paradigm, a new security and development architecture on the table, because that is the level where the solution to all problems can and must be found.
Now, just looking back on the extent of events that we were discussing today, it's obvious that the work of the International Peace Coalition is having an impact. You have another meeting coming up this Friday. What's on the agenda for the Friday meeting?
Well, I think for sure the Tulsi Gabbard video and what caused this to happen will be a topic. We will have top speakers. Last week we had a very remarkable group of people speaking: Senator Richard Black, Scott Ritter, Ray McGovern, several others from the VIPs, and naturally people from the Middle East. So I'm sure that the background of what caused Tulsi Gabbard to make such an absolutely alarming video will be a topic, and some insiders will talk about it. And naturally, the situation in the Middle East, as always, will be a subject, because this will be, practically immediately before the UN General Assembly meeting. So absolutely make sure you participate in it. Oh, I also know that we will have a very important speaker from India, Mr. Badra Kumar. He also will give the view of Indian diplomat on this whole matter. And I always think it is so important for people in the West to not just listen to the European or American view, but to also put yourself in the shoes of people from Africa, Asia, Latin America, to get a balanced judgment of where we stand in the world. So please join by all means.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us today. We'll see you on Friday, and keep inspiring people. We're obviously making some progress in an extremely tense and difficult world.
And don't forget to spread the Tulsi Gabbard video, repost it as many times as you can.